Greetings, Africans. We are glad that you join us for Pan-African Weekly News. My name is Monica, and with us we have Demetria. And
good morning.
Today we are your co-host, and we have some special guests here joining us from Millions for Prisoners, which we'll talk about more. Before we start the show, we always want to acknowledge that we are on Indigenous land, and this land belongs to the Indigenous people. We are in solidarity. We are in solidarity with them getting their land back. Demetria, do you want to carry it on for me?
Yeah, so we are acknowledging that we are on still Antigua territory. This land is not colonizer land, it's the land of the Indigenous people, and we stand in solidarity with our Indigenous comrades to struggle for their land back. So yeah, we do that at the beginning of every single show.
Yes, and not only do we acknowledge it, we're also in solidarity fighting with them. That's really critical to us. We, African People's Revolutionary Party, we're a Pan-African socialist organization fighting for a one unified Africa. We believe when our people are free, all people will be freed. And we are really focused on African liberation. Today we have what at the beginning of every show, what we also do is we call in an ancestor. And given the topic that we're going to talk about today, we have decided to call in George Jackson, who is a revolutionary organizer and a political prisoner assassinated. And we call in him into this space because the work that George Jackson did was to liberate our people and fight against systems that confide our people and oppress our people. So we're just continuously thankful for the ancestors who have led this work, and we continue this work. Today we have Stephanie and Celinda joining us from Millions for Prisoners. They are a prison abolitionist group. They work to dismantle anything that's connected to plantations that are around our country as well as globally in order to free our people behind the walls. And that also includes dismantling the 13th Amendment. Please welcome Stephanie and Celinda to the show. You can turn on your screens. Thank you, beautiful people. This is really excited to have our comrades on the show with us. And we've developed a series of questions that we're going to ask. And I'll start with before we start with the questions, would you all like to introduce yourselves?
Hi, my name is Stephanie Nelson, and I'm an organizer with Millions for Prisoners. In this role, we really work with educating our people and discussing how prison abolition is so integral to land back initiatives.
Hello, my name is Celinda Guerrero. Thank you so much. What an honor to be on this platform with all of you phenomenal revolutionaries, and really looking forward to this conversation about how we organize for our liberation. And we are unapologetically modern day abolitionists.
Yes, love it, love it. So we'll start in and dig in with the first question. What is Millions for Prisoners' approach to organizing, and what are you organizing to achieve?
Sorry about that. I couldn't get my mute off. So as I stated, we're modern day abolitionists. And so we seek to dismantle all of the structures of racial capitalism that oppress people of color and the poor across the world. In particular, state violence, issues of state violence, of policing and prisons. We understand that the conditions that we exist in today are only evolutions of the systems that started in this country that was that arrived, the United States arrived through genocide and slavery. And so we understand that those systems have never been dismantled, that they have only evolved into more sophisticated systems. Just as policing started as vigilantes on horseback, slave catchers, and the plantations have only evolved into what mass incarceration is today, as we know it, which is $1 billion industry in this country. The exploitation of labor continues. And so our work, our end game is to dismantle these systems. We understand that we may not see those systems dismantled. We may not see the liberation for all of our people in our lifetime, but we are going to do our work as if it is possible. Because even if we can move our people inches forward, our next generations will be freer, just as we stand on the shoulders of the giants before us and the abolitionists that are before us.
Thank you. That's so beautiful. And I can just say I've learned so much and grown so much more in understanding abolition work and how these systems has evolved. So thank you so much for your work. Stephanie, would you have anything to add?
I think that the other side of prison abolition that we try to bring is understanding that white supremacy culture is so ingrained in the carceral system. And so it's also educating that people who are convicted of crimes, regardless of whether they're guilty or not, that we are fighting to build a world that does not require prisons and police to exist, because all the community members will have the resources that they need to take care of themselves and to take care of each other. And so I think that building that space is another key part of our organization, and rejecting disposability politics.
Thank you for elevating that, because our people aren't just individuals to be tossed away. And so thank you for elevating that space. Our next question is around Free Them All Fridays. Demetria?
Oh, okay. So you all do Free Them All Fridays every Friday. And what is Free Them All Fridays, and what is the work you all do around the freedom around the prison abolition? So you've explained that in your previous two questions, but can you relate that to Free Them All Friday?
Yes, so Free Them All Fridays began on April 3rd. And that was the very first week that we took to the streets, because we knew that COVID-19 was going to be a death sentence in carceral facilities. And the policymakers are refusing to take any action to take care of our people. And we know that this is not necessarily because of the specific conditions of COVID-19, but it's just that COVID-19 exacerbates the existing medical neglect and abuse that occurs in the prison facilities. And so we had been receiving reports nationally that there were medical whistleblowers who work in the facilities stating that they were requesting, ventilators, they were requesting ways to keep people safe inside, and that instead their budget requests were met with body bags and toe tags. And so we felt that that was utterly unacceptable, because even if you believe in the carceral system, these people have a fundamental 8th Amendment right to freedom, or freedom from cruel and unusual punishment. And we've actually seen this be tested in Oregon in the 90s when they had first instituted the right to die policies. And there were a lot of inmates who were inside that had terminal diseases and were being denied access to their right to decide their final days, even though it was legal in that state. And so Oregon Supreme Court in the 90s ruled that a inevitable death, a impending death, is actually cruel and unusual punishment. And so they fought that prisoners should have that right to choose for themselves. And so we feel that with Free Them All Fridays, this is a cruel and unusual punishment, because what is COVID-19 but impending death for so many people? And even if you can justify the 2% of folks, that's an average if you look at the total, there's still lifelong, decades-long impacts that we know that COVID-19 will place on people. And this is only even more concerning when we know that our communities that are oppressed have shorter lifespans as is and already receive medical neglect. And so we believe that COVID-19 in the prisons is a continuation of ongoing genocide of our people. And we refuse to stand for that. So Free Them All Fridays pushes that not only should we be looking at these vulnerable populations, but that we should really push to free them all, because we can't guarantee the safety of anyone inside. And this includes the ICE detention facilities, because we know that they're the same machine, the same mechanism as our judicial system. It's still the entrapment and continuing evolution of enslavement, as we know that these facilities are taking private contracts. So with all that being said, we felt that it was so important to help people realize why abolition is necessary. It's necessary today. It was necessary last week. It was necessary before the system began. And that's what we're fighting to bring through Free Them All Fridays, as well as uplifting Clifton White.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? Because speaking of like genocide and medical neglect, I know we've been having conversations with people behind the walls, and specifically Celinda is the one who shared this information. Can you talk about the even more intense medical neglect that's happening behind the walls during COVID-19?
Yeah, I think also with that, if I can share, we organize with prisoners behind the walls. So our prisoners are actually organizing also for their freedom and liberation. And one of the things that we did at the beginning of Free Them All Fridays is we worked in coordination with our prisoners to put together a list of demands, and that we put forward. And it's the call to action list of demands. And I would just like to state them in this space, because these are still the demands of people behind the walls. 1, an immediate release of all people who are incarcerated. Quarantine is not possible, and we cannot get well in a cell. 2, no new crimes. A stay on all prosecutions and pretrial holdings. No more bodies behind the walls. 3, workers for the prisons must utilize hazardous sanitation protocols to include hand sanitizer before entering the facility, use of PPE, N95 face masks, subject to daily temperature checks, a mandatory 14-day quarantine if they or anyone in their family are exposed, are displaying symptoms, or travel. Prisoners must be treated like patients, and workers must take the same precautions as healthcare providers. 4, access to quality, speedy medical care. 5, prisoners receive the same federal relief payments that all residents of the United States are receiving, because they too are residents. This will be issued directly to their cash accounting books. 6, a demand that jails, prisons, and youth detention centers provide free, unlimited access to soap, sanitation, and a right to 6 feet of social distancing and cleaning products. 7, scheduled releases must continue without delay. 8, everyone who is on parole, who is parole eligible in the next 12 months should be automatically released. And 9, commissary access should be maintained throughout the duration of the pandemic. And so these list of demands were comprised at the beginning of the pandemic by with the people behind the walls who were calling out that these are things that they needed to try to stay alive in these conditions. And what we've seen since then is gross neglect of people behind the walls, from youth detention centers to immigration and federal holdings, as well as state prisons in New Mexico. We know that our prisoners are being denied access to hygiene products. They're being denied access to social distancing. In level 2 facilities, we still have 120 men sharing the same shower without any opportunity for sanitation in between. We've seen mass outbreaks in the Torrance facility. The prisoners actually had to riot in the pod to get a dying prisoner out because they refused to move him out of the pod. He hadn't eaten in 4 days and he was dying from COVID. And they had to have a whole riot just to get him moved out of the pod. We have prisoners who have been on technical probation and parole violations. That means it's not a new crime. It's a technical violation, who have been in the prison system since February and have not been adjudicated. The rules say that they should have been taken before a judge within 30 days. And that's important because a judge can reinstate them and send them home. But we have facilities that are refusing to even transport them to court. So we have prisoners who have been in there for 6 months waiting just to be adjudicated on a technical violation that's not even a crime, in pods that are full of people that are positive for COVID. We still see DOC transporting prisoners across the state. There was a load of prisoners that came on the Amtrak train from Farmington to Los Lunas at RDC, and half of those prisoners were COVID positive. And the response for COVID, for the quarantine that's happening in DOC is they're using conditions of extreme solitary confinement, illegal conditions. So when you go into a facility, they're putting you in solitary confinement 24/7 for sometimes up to 3 weeks. No mail, no phone calls, and no opportunity for a shower or contact outside of your cell. And this is the DOC's response to how to keep people safe, is by violating their human rights, violating their opportunity for their families to know that they're safe or even know what facility that they're in. And we keep seeing this as we pulled up to prison gates across this state for Free 'em All Fridays. We continue to see COs with no masks on, sharing cigarettes casually in the front of the facility. They are the ones who are making our loved ones sick, and they are the reason that it's spreading behind the walls. There's been an outbreak at Los Lunas RDC in the past 2 weeks. There's only 2 pods in the entire facility, both the level 2 and level 3, that are not COVID now. Let me say that again. That's like 1,000 prisoners who are in COVID pods right here in Los Lunas. Even the caseworkers have COVID at Los Lunas because they treated this for these 20 weeks so casually that they have done nothing to help the people that are behind the walls. And they created the conditions for it to spread massively. That is the reason that we are a hotspot in New Mexico, is because of the outbreak in the prisons here. Yet we have a governor who's being celebrated for her handling of COVID in the general society. We see her on CNN and MSNBC being celebrated. Yet she has failed our people that are behind the walls, and she has treated them like they are not human. And she should be held accountable for this. And so these are the conditions that we're dealing with when we're advocating for those who cannot have a voice right now, those who can't even get a phone call out, who are fighting for their lives right now behind the walls. Not just here in New Mexico, we organize with prisoners across the country. And we've been hearing the same reports, same responses from California, Louisiana. Virginia is the only place, interestingly enough, that our prisoners in the federal system there said that they're getting some of the things that they need, and that so far they're doing okay. Everybody else is in distress. This is a very, very, very important humanitarian issue right now.
And millions of prisoners actually tried to ask the Department of Corrections June of last year. So when I was in my graduate program, I was in a class regarding emergency preparedness, and one of it was for a novel pandemic. And so one of the assignments was to reach out to an emergency caseworker and to find out what the plan was. And so I had actually reached out to DOC's emergency preparedness planner, and that's Gabriel Salazar. He works for the Department of Corrections, and his literal job description, which is online, says that he has to prepare for natural disasters. And a pandemic is a natural disaster. And we asked, what would you do in the event of a novel pandemic? And how ironic was it that we never got a response for weeks? We had emailed, we called, and we know that that's because there was no plan. And then here comes 2019 and there's a novel pandemic, and they've refused to take any action or accountability. And we know that this is, again, just representative of how they treat people who are incarcerated across this country, right? Like when hurricanes happen, prisoners are not evacuated. They are left in their cells. And if they drown, they drowned. And there's no accountability. And in that same note, this is how they treat them during a pandemic. And so, we're calling on the fact that they're not even doing their supposed job. And it's not that we expect that this system will ever save anybody, but we're trying to highlight the disgusting disparities between this narrative that people have towards what prisons are, right? These myths of 4 or 3 hots in a cot, that prisons are somehow rehabilitative in nature, and they're just warehouses of abuse and torment.
And we actually heard the chief of police in Kenosha, who actually used that language in a recent press conference, where he said these people need to be warehoused and put away for the rest of their lives. And this is how they think of us. It's predatory and it's exploitive. And it's, this is what our work is. It's to call attention to the narrative, right? Because so much of the narrative has been turned into this rhetoric that makes people believe in crime and punishment, tough on crime, police are here to serve and protect. Like, we live in a colonized society that trains people to believe in these systems and to believe that some people are not entitled to their lives, to their livelihood, and that it's okay that some people become property. When prisoners are in prison or on probation and parole, they are literally labeled as state property. State property. This is what we're talking about, in that slavery has never ended. It has only evolved and continued into the systems that exist right now, that these are nothing more than modern day plantations, and that these systems only evolved into the contracting out into corporations. So we don't have individual plantation owners anymore. Now we have it contracted out to corporations like Geo Group, like Core Civic, Training Management Services. We have all 3 private prison contractors in New Mexico. This is $1 billion industry, and they profit from the labor of the bodies that are there. They profit from those bodies. And so this is by design. This evolution happened to preserve the economy that existed, that was built in the South, post-Confederate War, post-Civil War. And so when we talk about how things have evolved, that's what we're talking about, that these systems have only evolved.
And man, that is like a lot of heavy information. And also, I didn't know the 9 demands that was created by centering the most impacted, that people behind the walls actually developed those demands. And so that is phenomenal and so critical, given how they've been told exactly what you're saying, like they're state property, that they're people to be tossed away. And you are saying no, that they have a voice, they can organize to dismantle these symptoms. And so thank you for your work. That's really critical and important. Speaking of that, Stephanie kind of talked about this a little bit in the introduction. What is the critical value for Millions for Prisoners to create space for healing and justice practices?
So we recognize, and this is part of our discussion when we talk about recognizing and remembering the humanity of all all people and resisting white supremacy culture that tells us that some people can be disposable. And one thing that I know for certain is that doing work with people who are on death row, doing work with people who are serving hundreds of years that are never going to see the streets again, working with those folks who are accused of doing the greatest harm in the society, what I've learned is that they are often, almost always, the most victimized people in the society. They are the ones that every single institution failed and abused, from adoption systems and foster care systems and group homes and juvenile detention centers. 93% of adult prisoners started in the juvenile system. These are children that were never loved, who end up fighting for their own survival and ended up in situations that were out of their control. And it's really important that we recognize what this means, that violence is a symptom of people in the struggle. And we talk about it this way, right? Like the society tells us that there's 3 things we can be in the system. We can be a predator or offender, we can be a victim, and we can be a savior. And that's how the system wants us to believe. But the truth of the matter is that we are all of those things almost all of the time. And that we've created a system that does more harm and violence to people than people could ever do to each other. And we have to recognize what that means. And so the people that we work with, who we organize with, our people, we are the most traumatized in the society. We are the people who carry PTSD, who carry deep trauma. And so healing justice is critical and important in our work when we're organizing, because we have to be able to hold people through being able to help them decolonize and deconstruct white supremacy culture, helping them to deconstruct and how do you reconcile the fact that you're a slave when you just arrived in the system and you don't understand this political education and you're trying to deconstruct all of the lies that have been told to you, all the implications of guilt that have been imposed on us, that we are born guilty when we look a certain way, when we're born in a certain neighborhood, in a certain zip code, that we are automatically guilty at birth. And that is a big burden to carry. And it's often one that our prisoners carry throughout duration because they are colonized, they are inside of the plantation, being told that this is their fault and that this is what they deserved. And so to work with a community that has this level of trauma and colonization requires us to spend lots of time and comfort in holding people carefully because to decolonize can be trauma in itself. It can be painful when somebody is reconciling the only reality that they've ever known and having to bring acknowledgement into the structures and seeing them for what they are. And that consciousness can be very painful. It can be very painful. And so it's really important that we are always using our healing practices, things that are inside of us, that our elders taught us. And how do we, when we're having a PTSD episode, when we're triggered, how do we get through this moment in time? How do we get through this minute, much less the survival of this next year, of this next 10 years, of this next till I'm free, or I'm never free, but how do I free my mind so that I am not in constant pain every day when I'm on death row? How do I liberate my own self in these conditions? And then how do we support people that are in this process? How do we hold them, right? And so that's what a tremendous part of our work is being able to help people with the political education, hold people through that arriving at consciousness. How do we exist there? And I'll give you an example. One of our prisoners who recently learned about fascism and about symbols of fascism, symbols that a lot of people didn't recognize before, right? Like these Punisher symbols or the blue line symbols and all these, the bumblebee with the 13 with the guns, right? All these symbols of fascism that exist. And he's at Los Lunas RDC, and he said, I went into the rec room and I hadn't been here since a year before. The prisoners had to paint a mural inside of the rec room at Los Lunas prison. He said, and in the middle of the New Mexico flag on this painting, it has the Punisher symbol in the center of the flag. He said, and it's like the prisoners had to paint this on there. And so these are the slave catchers who are in control of these conditions. And so they put their symbols all around them to impede, right? To impede this oppression onto them. And that symbolism is important. And so many of the prisoners didn't recognize it, but for the ones that do, they recognize where they are and the trauma of what that brings. They see their tattoos of the bumblebees with the, and you know, he was saying they're gangbanging, like these systems are nothing more than a giant gang. Like they're in here gangbanging, like putting up their symbols all over the plantation. And they're doing it intentionally to try to harm us, and it's psychological warfare. And that's the conditions that they exist in. And so when we're helping to support people who are existing in these conditions, when the prisoners at Angola have to go out and pick cotton, the gloves that they put on their hands to go pick cotton have a Confederate flag sewn onto them. So we recognize that the people that we are serving, the people that we are here to support and organize with in solidarity, these are the conditions that they're existing in. And so healing justice is so critical and important. And how do we help support people that are in the conditions of ongoing trauma, and that merely having something that says Millions for Prisoners on it is considered contraband and you can be punished. Having something that says, I walk on it, you will be punished. You will be sent to the dungeon in Angola. You will be sent to the hole. You will be sent to Expot in New Mexico. So merely being exposed, having literature that is for their liberation will be punished. And these are the conditions that we talk about, that this is slavery. This is the existence of slavery still. Just like slaves were not allowed to read and write, didn't get to have access to books, this is the way that they continue to oppress our people. And those conditions have not changed.
And I think adding to that is also encouraging folks that are watching this that are maybe new to prison abolition, or just even in your regular conversations, is also calling out language that incites violence against prisoners on prisoners. We see this a lot when someone is convicted of a crime that community members would consider heinous, or even just accused of, and they'll often cheer on the idea of sexual assault. They'll often cheer on the idea of them being murdered. And it's just so ironic that the very same behavior that we believe that people should be thrown away for, we also want to weaponize that against themselves. And they often refer to it as prison justice. And it's all it's doing is encouraging people who are already being treated and abused as if they are animals, that they must act like that as their only source of redemption. And so I would really encourage, if any of you hear those jokes, those narratives, you know, in the same way that we would not accept community members threatening sexual assault on community members on the outside, do not engage in those conversations, regardless of what it may be on the inside, because all you're doing is actually uplifting this system. And all you're doing is really creating a narrative that helps no one, right? Because it doesn't treat the source of why that person is there. And we know through decades of research that the three sources of crime are poverty, trauma, and a lack of access to resources. This has been well documented. And so much of, and this is what Celinda was talking about like a lot of the crime that we see is related to people who are in the struggle, is that the United Nations refer to it as survival crime. I hear so many people say, oh, well, if they were stealing food, I wouldn't have an issue, but they stole iPods. Well, they're stealing iPods because they need to make rent. And so I can't sell bread on the street to be able to take care of my family. And so the United Nations found that 93%, and this was also in 2003, the 93% of all crime in the world is related to survival crime. And so we know that if we were to invest in our communities, if we were to provide those resources, and as Linda always talks about, hold people through their trauma and to be able to bring them to spaces of healing, that majority of the crime would solve itself. And then what you're left with is the few outliers that you work with and you help address. Is it due to a mental illness? Is it due to other sources that we as a community could really hyper focus? I mean, 7% of the world would actually would not theoretically be treated by meeting everyone's needs, by guaranteeing housing, by guaranteeing healthcare, by guaranteeing access to equal education. And I think that this also goes back to the narrative that COs get. So not many people know this, but in the 90s, my dad actually was a CO for 3 months. And we were actually just talking yesterday because he said, when I joined on, they told me, you are not to call them inmates. You treat them with respect. You call them residents. And so there's this weird narrative that's given to COs when they sign on that they're there to help people. And when my dad got inside, he said that the most violence ever came from the COs, and that's why he couldn't do it. And so I think that it's also important that this is why we talk so much about healing, is about dismantling the narrative, because we see it in all the systems, right? I'm going to run for president because I'm going to change this country from the inside. I'm going to be a cop because I'm going to change it from the inside. And it's because we give this narrative that people have the tools within the system to dismantle that which is oppressing them. And a system could never survive hundreds of years of oppression and genocide if it gave the people, the masses of people, the tools to dismantle it themselves. And so we have to, and Celinda has really helped this year with uplifting that we're going to call all of this what it is. We're going to call a plantation owner, and that's what Michelle Lujan Grisham is. We're going to call these facilities, they're not rehabilitation centers, they are plantations. We are going to call police slave catchers because we've made it sound nice. We've given this illusion that that this can help people. And so that all goes back to that quote, right, about the North won the war, but the South won the narrative. And they're still pushing this narrative. And so I just want to uplift that. For me, I find that to be a really important part of creating space for healing and justice practices, because we're no longer tolerating these nice labels that they're putting. You can't be gently oppressed.
Nope. And words mean things. So if we're going to be adults, call things out, call them as they are. So when we're talking about these facilities, I know, Sonda, this is very personal for you regarding Clifton White. He was taken off of our streets. He was stolen off of our community streets. So how can the community get involved, and why was he taken?
So on May 28th, Millions for Prisoners organized a solidarity action with our comrades here in New Mexico, a solidarity action for George Floyd. And we wanted to call attention to state violence. And we decided to do it on Wyoming and Central because we know that our neighborhood is the heart of state violence. We know that the feds roll out from the armory right there on Copper in Wyoming every single night into our neighborhoods. We understand state violence very well because we face it every single day just driving in our neighborhoods. And so we decided to hold the action there. It was a beautiful, beautiful action where everybody came out. People were in the streets. There were people walking off Texas with their babies in their arms and joining in. And for just a few hours, our community felt a sense of liberation, a sense of being able to speak their truth to power, to be able to yell out loud, "Fuck the police. We don't need you. We got us." And they lit fireworks and they stood in the street and they honored each other, and we created a space for grief and healing, and it was beautiful. And at the conclusion of that, the police, we could tell that they were very agitated that evening. And some young women pulled up to us and they said, the police have some black and brown kids down the street and they have AKs in their faces. So we immediately activated our Cop Watch team and we all went down there. And one of the tactics that we use in Cop Watch is to disrupt the scene, to try to help free our people. Clifton and I immediately started to circle in between the police. When we arrived, there was 12 unmarked cars in the back of the kids' car, Amasya and Central, and there was a tank, the APD tank in front of the kids for 4 children. 2 16-year-olds and 2 18-year-olds, we later learned, 2 black kids and 2 brown kids. They were tossing them around and interrogating them, and we were interfering in the scene. So much to the point that they got the kids and they put them in the tank and they rolled off with them and they brought the riot police in on us. We were about 30 people, maybe 20 to 30 people still left. And they brought the riot police in. We had a standoff with the riot police. They gassed us. Some community members got injured and our street medics began to assist them. When we turned and recognized as the scene was clearing that that APD had left the kid's car with the keys on the hood, just right here on Amasya and Central, just left their property behind. We saw the kids' backpacks in the back seat, and we decided that we already knew we were going to look for the kids, but we decided we needed to take possession of their property to make sure that it was cared for and returned back to them. Clifton drove the car back to our neighborhood down the street off the one-way, and when he got onto our street, APD boxed him in. Stephanie and I were pulling up at that time. We went into Cop Watch mode again, and APD essentially stole the car from us, and we have it on video. Multiple violations of their own rules and regulations, violations of what the mayor says that they're supposed to be doing in our neighborhoods and not doing. And we had video that incriminated them. And so they continued to target our family. Our family's been under surveillance for many years, since at least 2016, when we were fighting against the feds back then for the racially charged federal sting operation that happened in the International District at that time that targeted the Black and brown community. Clifton was the supervisor at Trendsetter's Barbershop at that time. And Trendsetters was one of the targets of that federal sting operation. And so that's how we got so closely involved in the fight back then and continued to be. And so the surveillance intensified after May 28th until on June 1st. Clifton and I were over off of Gibson in the shopping center there, and the undercover cops came and surrounded us, and they kidnapped Clifton from me. The young people whose car it was that we ended up connecting to and helping them get counsel and just supporting them, because this is what our work is. As they were trying to get their car back, APD was threatening the young people and telling him that they needed him to press charges on Clifton, that's the way he would get his car back, is that if he pressed charges on Clifton for grand theft auto, for stealing his car. So during these 4 days that Clifton was in custody at MDC, from June 1st until that following Thursday, APD was threatening the young people and trying to manufacture a new criminal case against him. And so they continued to threaten the kid. The kids would not come, they would not do it. And one of the young people, he said, I told them I probably wouldn't even be alive if it wasn't for y'all showing up that night. And I'm not gonna do that. And so they didn't cooperate with the police, and the police eventually didn't have anything except for to say that Clifton violated his parole. For people in the system, we understand and know that when there's a parole violation, your PO will take you into custody, and they take you to RDC. They take you back to DOC custody. They don't take you to the county jail. Only on probation violations, not on parole retakes. Parole retakes you, the rule says you go right back to the prison. And so that's really important in this conversation, because those 4 days that they were trying to manufacture a crime, he was not in the jurisdiction of MDC. If indeed their story is that he was on a parole retake. And the reason that this is important is because we recently learned from somebody who leaked from inside of the county that there was conversations happening between the deputy chief at MDC, high-ranking officials at APD, and high-ranking officials at DOC, where they were having a text thread communication about Clifton. And every time they spoke about him, they called him the N-word. And so they were saying things on their county cell phones that we pay for them to have. On those phones, they were having derogatory conversations about Clifton and our family. One of the examples that they gave was that the deputy chief at MDC said, I don't want this nigger in my facility. That's what is in the county cell phone. This is the context of the conversations that they were having. And highly racially charged, very offensive. And the reason that this is important is that there's an internal investigation that started because of the racial connotations inside of that conversation. And what they were attempting to do was close the internal investigation so that they could sweep it under the carpet and save the careers of these high-ranking officials that were using this language. They never expected that this was going to get out, and that's why somebody had to leak it to us. So we're right now in the process of fulfilling the IPRA to get the information related to this internal investigation that's happening. But when we talk about institutional racism and the preying on our people, this is what we're talking about. This is the context of the theory that is behind these systems, and that they are allowed to behave this way. And I'll never forget when I told Clifton about what happened and this leak that came out, and he said, oh yeah, they talk to us every day like that over here on the plantation. They use that language to us every day. He said, it's just a relief to know that it's in a public record now, and maybe the rest of the society will get to see and know the conditions that we exist in, because it's very common on the plantation that they are spoken to that way. And so this is what we're Millions for Prisoners. We see ourselves as truth tellers in the society. We see ourselves as being able to lift the truth about what is actually happening within these systems, and helping to be the voice for those who do not have access to being a voice, don't have access to a platform or the ability to speak for themselves. Andrew Miller talked to KUNM in the middle of pandemic regarding the conditions that were on the plantation for COVID. And he's still today in solitary confinement. It's been almost 2 months. He is still in solitary confinement as a punishment for him speaking to KUNM over the phone and outing the conditions that were happening in COVID. And so it is critical and important in our work that we continue to carry the truth out into the community, into the society, and lift those voices that are so oppressed. And so Clifton, my husband, was kidnapped in these conditions, because he's state property, there is no, when you're on a parole retake and you're state property, there are no systems that can free you. There's no court that you can be adjudicated in. There is no system that does that. And so Michelle Lujan Grisham, with the stroke of her pen, could free him because she is the plantation owner and he is state property. She is the only mechanism. She's the only tool that could free him right now if she was just willed to. She's refused to even talk about what has happened with him. And I hope that once we out even more of what the targeting has been, that she's accountable, right? She's accountable for all of these structures that existed. The Department of Corrections was in that text thread. State employees were in that text thread. She is responsible for the things that have happened. She absolutely knows about the internal investigation. She absolutely knows about the racial charged motivations of these slave catchers who kidnapped Clifton and who attacked our family. And she is responsible. And so she is the only one. And so when I think about how we frame it, when people kept saying, well, can't we get a lawyer? Can't we get, no, those systems do not exist for somebody who's on the plantation. And so we are still compelling people across the world, please call Michelle Lujan Grisham and ask her to free Clifton White, who was a political prisoner, who was targeted and taken back to the plantation only because he chose to defend young people in his community on the night of the George Floyd protest. That is why APD targeted us. That is why they kidnapped him. And it was completely retaliation for us defending our community. So you can call Michelle Lujan Grisham at 505-476-2200, 505-476-2200, and compel her to free Clifton White. He does not have any criminal charges. He is only on the plantation because he's state property, and he is accused of violating the terms of being a slave. He had contact with slave catchers. That's essentially what the rules say. If you have contact with police, you can be violated and taken back to the plantation. That's what his violation is for.
And for more information, All African People's Revolutionary Party has posted a script in the Facebook comments. You can get information on scripts as well as numbers of who to call to demand his release.
And every time you hear about it, it just makes less and less sense. I'm sorry, Stephanie. It's so frustrating because it makes no sense.
Yeah, and I just want to call out that, like, since we always talk about how this is no different than the conditions than we were existing in before, it's just an evolution. Really framing this text conversation as just the 2020 dialect of sending someone down the river, right? I don't want them on my plantation, but because they're state property and because their human capital gives me money, because these private prisons need heads for their beds, I got to send them to another facility, but I'm not going to release them. So I just wanted to uplift that side.
Thank you for sharing that. And something that Millions for Prisoners did was they found that in New Mexico, if you are African, you are 7 times more likely to be incarcerated. And we would have never known this data if it wasn't for the work that Millions for Prisoners is doing. And so that, again, everything that you all are talking about is rooted in capitalism and rooted in white supremacy, where they're making $100,000 plus a year annually off people behind the walls. It is inhumane. It is state violence. It is torture. And even what they're doing to Andrew for speaking up about the COVID-19 challenges and dangers that were happening behind the walls. Thank you so much for sharing with us about the manufactured crime that they're doing against Clifton, as well as how we can all get involved. All of us can take time to make calls, to make emails, to share it. to demand his release. And we are in solidarity with you, with not only just Clifton being freed, but everyone behind the walls being freed. The last question that we have for you, and in the comments, if people can comment if you have questions, but this is the last question that we have for Millions for Prisoners today, is how is Millions for Prisoners involved in African liberation?
Oh, that's exactly what I was about to just say. I'm sorry. I got ahead of your question. What I wanted to say is that Millions for Prisoners, deeply rooted in our values, is that we lead with Black liberation framework. All of our work is grounded and centered in Black liberation framework, because we understand, we understand that race is a social construct. It's a tool of supremacy culture. And because we understand that, and because we understand the predatory nature that racial capitalism still has on our community, we must lead with Black liberation framework, because we know that when we lift Black people, all people lift. And it is so important that we always stay grounded there. And so always standing with communities that are under attack, with the communities that are most oppressed. Even here in New Mexico, we're only 3% Black. But when we look at our numbers behind the walls, they're the same per capita as Louisiana and as Alabama. There's a literal genocide on the Black community in New Mexico when it comes to state violence. And it is so important that we continue to uplift that and continue to call it out, because our people are struggling. We were at a cop watch last night, and we will continue to be out here every single day monitoring slave catchers and making sure that we try to protect our community. And it is so important for us all to be united in that struggle, and to understand that we always, always, always must center Black liberation framework as our foundation in our values, because that is the path for freeing all people.
I want to also highlight some of the comments. I'm sorry, I really got caught up in the interview. Some of the comments people were saying in the chat. It's been very, very busy. Oh, I just lost, sorry, I'm looking for it. So some of the comments talked about, a question was asking, I just lost my place. Sorry, y'all, technology is not working for me right now. But people were saying, prisons are violence. It's a repulsive part of white supremacy culture, and it needs to be dismantled. DJ Brill posted a reflection question for people to think about that was connected to the work that you all are elevating and involved in. And people were also sharing how we need our communities funded, not police, not these systems that continue to harm us. And also about the 93% of the crime of the world is related to survival crime. And so that was really critical for somebody to reflect on. So there's a lot of comments happening here, happening as well in this space.
I'm seeing them, and just so much love and solidarity to all. We often talk about when one of our loved ones is behind the walls, the entire family is incarcerated. And so our entire family does feel the pain and the struggle every day that more and more of our loved ones are behind the walls, and just that solidarity and the pain that we feel when somebody from our family is missing and has been kidnapped and taken to the plantation. And so we know also that this is another tool of supremacy culture that says that our families need to be divided. Clifton received paperwork as soon as he got to the plantation that said that he is no longer to live with me, should he be reinstated. So should he have prevailed somehow and been able to come back home, that the system is telling him that he's no longer allowed to reside with his family. He actually got paperwork from Department of Corrections that says that. This is a tool that has always been used, the separation of families that we see at the border today, that is the same that happened at the beginning of the United States, when they were kidnapping children off of the res and taking them to boarding schools, when they were selling children off from plantations and separating families. These are the same tools, because they know that we are strong together. They know that we are bonded and that we need each other. And so this is a pain or a plan to cause trauma and pain and the struggle for our families. And it's why we talk about CYFD being state violence. CYFD inflicts the same level of violence on our families. This separation is nothing more than a tool of supremacy culture.
Thank you so much. And a few comments that have been shared. So Ricky shared that they have somebody who supposedly violated parole, who's been in a month and a half, still not told what the violation is. If he's revoked, he's facing life. He'll end up in life. And these are the conditions that you all have been calling out. Another comment said, thank you so much, from Tigre, about thank you so much for taking the time to share all this invaluable information. I will be personally sharing as much of this information as I can, as far and wide, from the root to the leaf. The system is rotten. Much love and respect.
Yeah, and I just want to offer, we do workshops in political education at Millions for Prisoners, and they're available on our webpage, on our Facebook page. You can watch any of the workshops. If you still are trying to deconstruct or decolonize and reconcile with abolition, we have an Abolition 101 workshop available. We have a workshop on racial capitalism in labor unions that we've done. We have one that speaks to the military industrial complex and prison industrial complex, the intersections that happen there. And so I just want to welcome people. Feel free to go on our page and access any of those videos. We also have a YouTube page called We Are the Revolution, where we upload prisoner interviews and community member interviews, and share political education there. And one thing that I neglected to say that I just want to uplift in this space really quickly is I want to shout out the name Vicente Villela. We've been working with his family, and the reason that the George Floyd solidarity protest on May 28th was so important to us is because we have our own I Can't Breathe stories right here in Albuquerque. And we wanted to uplift. Vicente was murdered in MDC, where 6 CEOs held him in the very same position that George Floyd was held in, and he was shouting, "I can't breathe," as he died. And I just want to send love through the universe to his wife, Lupe, who was pregnant at the time with his son and had their 6-year-old daughter. So now she's all alone out here with her 2 children because their father was murdered in the booking area at MDC in the same conditions as George Floyd. And so I just want to uplift his name, Vicente Villela.
Thank you so much for uplifting his name and his family in this space. There is a question, because there's a lot of discussion happening, but one question is around what is the news or media? Then hold on, I'm sorry, I lost it, but it was just about the news and the media. Like how have they been involved, the news and the media?
I really want to give huge gratitude to KUNM and the Daily Lobo, who have fearlessly covered this situation. The Daily Lobo actually reached out to APD for the reports related to Clifton's arrest. And instead, what they got back from Chief Medina, Deputy Chief Medina, was an email that told the Daily Lobo reporter, you should know who you're writing about, and then sent attachments of all of Clifton's records from him as a juvenile and from 2001, from his original arrest, the original case, and attempted to tarnish Clifton's reputation and to try to deter people from being able to support him. The Daily Lobo reporter pushed back, but others have not. Channel 7, we had to do an actual cease and desist order to Channel 7, KOAT, because of the hit piece that they did on our family. And they stole video from Stephanie's live stream, and they chopped and screwed it to make it look as if we were agitating or attacking the police. Channel 13 has run several hit pieces on our family and on Channel 13. They even did a hit piece on my family's eviction. That was Channel 13. Channel 4 has also done a hit piece on Clifton. And the mayor's office, Tim Keller's office, had been giving bad information and running hit pieces using the local media to attack our family and to substantiate them or to sustain themselves in their narrative. And so there's a show called On the Road Show, who happened to capture the video of me confronting Tim Keller on Civic Plaza concerning the hit pieces that he ran and the false statements that his office has been giving about our family in an attempt to protect APD and what they've done to our community. And so mainstream media has not been helpful in any way. They have been working in coordination. And I think about what Malcolm taught us is that we cannot have confidence in the newspapers, right? That the newspapers will have you believing that the oppressed are the offenders. And so, I don't believe that we will seek or find truth or reconciliation or any kind of support through mainstream media. It has absolutely been KUNM. It's been the nonprofit media, the ones who are not bounded to corporations, who have been helping to be the truth tellers. And I encourage anybody who wants to learn more, go on KUNM. The streams are still up and we've shared them. Noah Tapia, who's one of the young people that was kidnapped that night in the tank, he told his story. And they've run several stories for us where they've helped to get the narrative out. So just really, really grateful to all of the reporters out there that are fearlessly standing in solidarity with the truth.
Thank you so much, Stephanie and Celinda, for sharing time and being in space and community with us. And as we wrap up your interview, is there anything you would like to share with the audience?
You can go first, Stephanie. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I just want to share that I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be here with you all. I'm grateful for numerous reasons. You all have built such a beautiful platform with your weekly shows, and to be able to speak with our community, to be able to learn so much from AAPRP, to feel in true camaraderie with you all is a gratitude I just can't even begin to express. And I'm grateful for the people that have watched today that maybe felt some uncomfortable feelings when we talk about prison abolition, when we talk about what that might mean, especially when it may be bringing up things when some people have been victims of certain crimes. And I just want to say that I'm grateful that we can work through these spaces, and none of this is easy. Decolonizing, no matter what area of it you're focused on, is ever easy. But that we can always lean on each other to help. And I know that almost every single one of you, from Monica, Demetrius, Linda, and other folks in our network, when we struggled sometimes with understanding some of these concepts, we're able to lean on one another. And I think that would be something that I'd share with the audience is white supremacy culture tells us that if we make a mistake, that we are a mistake, and whether that mistake is something about law and order, to whatever that means, or whether it's even just making a mistake within spaces of decolonizing, this goes back to the disposability culture. And I would just really encourage that you be brave, and you choose to challenge yourself, and that in a healthy community, in a healthy society, when mistakes are made, accountability is not a cancellation of you. Accountability is, I love you so much and I care about you so much that I want you to do better and I want you to learn. And, you know, I remember when I first joined this space, and particularly speaking to other European folks, I was always nervous that I would perpetuate racism. And I spent more of my energy trying to prove that I wasn't racist than doing anti-racist work. And so to other European folks who may be watching, you know, we talk about jumping in the messiness of it all and knowing that the community is going to be here to hold us through it. And it's not to say that you can unload your labor that you need to work on for yourself on oppressed people, but it's to say that, you know, thrive on accountability, be open to these conversations, and know that it's always going to be uncomfortable because all growth comes from spaces of discomfort, but it does not mean that the work is any less necessary.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for lifting all of that and standing in our values. And I just want to say the thing that's most important that we always say in our spaces, and that I just want to continue to hold us with, is just that we're going to always lead with love. We're going to always lead with love. And that is how we care for each other in our community. We do restorative justice in our community. We practice transformative justice models in our community. We live in a community that is not safe to call the police and never has been. So we have already learned how to live in a society that does not require these systems. And we just want to continue to spread it more broadly and know that we can solve our own problems and that we are a mighty people united, and that our unity is how we are going to seek and find our liberation. And that I just am honored to be in this space, because the collective work that we all do together is what is going to lead to a freer world for my children. And that my children inspire me every day to want to make sure that they are in a safe world and that they are cared for and loved every minute. And so I just want to thank you all for this platform and this space, and we're going to continue to stand in our courage and lead with love. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We look forward to continued collaboration and being in solidarity in the community. Celinda and Stephanie are finishing and completing their interview. And what we're just going to finish with is a few COVID-19 updates and some other things that are happening in New Mexico.
All right, it's time to go. COVID updates. COVID is still a thing. You still need to be wearing your mask. You still need to be washing your hands. You still need to be staying in your home if you can possibly do so. Remember, our test rates our positivity cases are much, much lower all of a sudden, but also testing is harder to get. So take that with a grain of salt. If you have a child in a special ed program in Albuquerque Public School District, your children have the opportunity to possibly come back to school on campus around the 14th of September. However, remember, just on Friday, APS closed 10 campuses because there were positive COVID cases on those campuses. So maybe keep your kids at home. What else we got? John Brown Breakfast Club is still feeding people every single Saturday. The good folks at John Brown don't miss a beat. They stay ready to take care of their community. The Red Nation is feeding folks on the third Sunday.
I think they're doing every Sunday now.
Oh, snap. Look at the Red Nation out there showing out for folks every Sunday, feeding the community. FAM, the good folks at FAM stay ready to take care of our kids. And they do the Zoom read along. It's Saturday or Sunday on Zoom. Amazing work, amazing folks standing in for our kids and showing up for our kids, which is fantastic. The All African People's Revolutionary Party has the Pan-African Film Series every second Saturday of the month, even through COVID. It is going to happen on Facebook Live. You can watch the film with us on Facebook Live, and then we will be jumping in a Zoom call to have conversation about the film. That happens the 12th of September at 2:00 Mountain Time. So join us there. If you are watching this, you will obviously see a link for the film. So jump in there. And I think that is about it for us. I got nothing else. I've actually been real quiet today. Kind of nice. So if you stay ready for revolution, you ain't got to get ready. Find an organization. If you've been watching any of our shows for any period of time, there's not a shortage of organizations to get in. There's an organization for you. And if you can't find one, start one, because you don't have time to be sitting on the sidelines. America is on fire. And if you can't leave it, you better be ready to fight these flames. So that is it for me. You got anything else?
I don't. Signing off. Stand ready for the revolution.